several years back, we had the inquiries into child sexual exploitation, and we saw a really significant shift in how we had to work better. We've more recently talked about child criminal exploitation, often about
Yeah,
county
yeah.
lines. And the question for me is, what have we learned previously that we can replicate now? Because I often have the same conversations with people about recognizing criminal exploitation as abuse,
Yeah.
and as significant harm. But what I've also noticed is while the eye and the focus is on criminal exploitation, far less children are coming to the authorities' attention for being at risk of or vulnerable to child sexual
Mm,
exploitation.
mm.
And it's making me think that how do we create a space where you can focus on more than one thing at a time,
Yeah.
and where we can actually drive, where we can learn from what we've done rather than start again with something
Yeah.
new.
It was ever thus because I mean, if you think about we should think about policing and we think about police forces and we think about the Macpherson report
Mhm,
that was 30 years ago post Stephen Lawrence's
mhm,
death. And then 30 years later, we have Baroness Casey and her report basically on the back of what happened to Sarah Everard. And it says exactly the same thing, right?
mm,
So in 30 years, you were given a clear outline of your faults and what needed to change. And 30 years later, not only are you being told as a police force or police forces around the world that it's exactly the same, add to that now homophobia, misogyny, everything on top of that. And it's just like, how is it? Where's the accountability?
mm.
How can an emergency service, the police, be allowed to get away with not holding themselves to account? And it's this sort of disconnect with the people that they are supposed to be safeguarding and not understanding the issues within those communities and how they should be interacting, you know, with communities. I talk to people about, when it comes to especially violence against women and girls, one of the biggest issues in that sphere is is data, not
Mhm.
having the, being able to people not reporting. And the reason why people aren't reporting is because we do not know how to connect with those difficult to connect with members of the public, right? So whether it's of a particular faith and their cultures and customs means that that woman is in a position where she
Mm,
either doesn't recognize abuse that she's getting as abuse because
mhm,
this is just what happens,
mhm,
or she's so frightened. She's afraid of the system outside of her cultural home,
mhm,
and she's no way is she going to come and walk into a police station or go to somewhere. Yeah, because she's frightened. We need to bridge that. We need to find a way to insert ourselves into that person's space to give them the tools to make them feel that the institution is trustworthy and that it's legitimate. And we need to get them to then come so that we can start building a picture of what really is going out there. Another big area that no one talks about is black churches. The level of domestic violence and abuse of women within the black church is phenomenal. The government has made a pledge to halve um, the occurrences of violence against women and girls and domestic violence. I think the number is running at the numbers that have been reported 2 million. Actually, they believe it's double that number per year. 4 million women potentially a year getting abused by mainly men, right? So we want to halve that. How are we going to do that? How are we going to do that, right?
I think without going into this is some of what potentially we should be doing.
Correct.
Um, just going back slightly
Mm.
to how do you find police forces, police services, other agencies? How do they receive the message that you outline?
It's interesting because I think, I mean, I came into the industry and I told everyone, I'm the disruptor. I'm not here to make friends. I don't care whether you like me. And I think being able to come into an industry where you can see the wood for the trees,
Mhm,
I have this sort of, holistic view when I'm looking at big sky, big picture thinking, and I think about all the elements in a community and what is needed. And I've made it my point to kind of reach out to as many of those over the
mhm,
last 2 years exhausting. It's
It's impressive.
But it's what you need to get these people. And what you can do by doing that is say, why are you wasting your time on that? They've already done it. It doesn't work. Or actually, they're working on a really similar project. Get together, have a conversation. And it's almost like I keep saying to people that I feel like I'm this sort of conductor, and I've got this sort of broad spectrum view of stuff and understanding, and I'm able to pull on those things and get people in the room together. And that's what it's all about. And I think in the beginning, I think everyone thought I was bonkers. I think they literally just thought, is she mad? Like, what, she thinks she's going to do all of that? I recognise, of course, I wasn't going to be able to do that on my own. But the work that I did for the initial 2 years was on my own, was painstakingly having hundreds of conversations with all people across policing, communities, third sector, charities, you name it. And then once I'd done that, then you're in a position of authority, authenticity, like people know what you're about. Then you can draw on those people and say, come with me, right? This is what I'm trying to do. So I think I think they all thought I was bonkers in the beginning. And I think a few people were probably secretly thinking, we're not going to see her next week or next month or whatever. And I was still there, still talking. And I think I earned their respect. And I think that's probably what I needed. And I think it was the fact that I didn't have an agenda. My agenda was the agenda, right? And I would praise institutions where they needed to be praised, but I wouldn't be afraid to call them out either. And I think there was a level of respect that came out of that. And also my openness and willingness to talk to anyone, everyone. I particularly call out people and say, I don't actually want to speak to the converted. Bring me the naysayers, right? We'll have it out. So that's what I need. I need to change that 15% because I genuinely believe that 85% of the world that we live in within our country, these are decent people who want to do the right thing, who want to live cohesively and want to, do what they can to educate young people to stop and prevent violence and antisocial behaviour. Genuinely, I believe that 85% of the people living in the UK, but that 15% can rise pretty quickly before we blink our eye, right? And that happens through apathy, right? So kind of taking your eye off the ball and just kind of thinking, oh no, that'll never happen until it does. And so I think we've got to be really proactive and direct about what it is we're trying to do and why it is we're trying to do it. We want to protect the social cohesiveness within our country, and that means we need to do this, and this, right? And we have to work in a particular way in order to do that. And here are some of the benchmarks: reducing antisocial behaviour, cutting down violence against women, making sure that certain communities, are protected and recognised that they need to be protected, creating safer spaces, having spaces where people can talk openly about issues that are taboo, right? But if we're going to do anything about these, we can't pussyfoot our way around them. We need to be able to talk about race. We need to talk about, marginalised communities. We need to talk about issues around integration, right? Because these are really important things, and people who want to destroy social cohesiveness will use those things as a tool against the majority, and we've got to stop that. And I think everybody, as I say, it comes back to it's everybody's problem, and we all can do. And it's not about I'm not suggesting that everyone should go out and sort of take on the world like me, but we all live our lives in a particular way. I was given an example the other day to someone. I just said, imagine if we could utilise the role of a postman. And they were like, what are you talking about? I said, think about the postman in our communities, what that person does. They get up, they have work on shifts, generally early morning, but whatever. They know the layout and the structure of a particular area, like the back of their hands. They meet people every day. Some of them they know by name, some of them, but they have an awareness about their community that we're just not tapping into, right? I'm not suggesting that we should turn them into spies, but I'm just saying, mums on the school run, right? They walk or drive a particular way every day. When I say be involved. I don't mean that you have to go and sit on the board of governors of a school, but it's just about being aware of your surroundings and not doing anything if you see something's amiss, right? Do something about it. Make that phone call. Step in. Have a conversation. Check up.
I
If you
love
haven't
that
seen,
idea around postman, because
yeah,
if you told me 20 years ago that you're going to be a social worker, you're going to be working in different agencies, you're going to be talking to multiple different businesses, hospitality, retail, security teams, and they're going to be your partners. They're going to be your
correct.
safeguarding partners. I don't think I would have comprehended that. Certainly coming in, fresh-eyed and new, and certainly working within the rail industry and working across the country has taught me so much about how important what you're describing is. If we really want to understand spaces, places, networks, relationships, we need to work with those communities. We need to work with individuals. We need to work with people that are on the ground.
Yeah, big institutions, right? These are like, the post office has had its issues, but this is a huge institution. It's a nationalised institution, and they are at the ground level. They're front line, just like a door supervisor is, just like a retail worker is. Whatever these are, or someone working in a hospital or in A&E. These are people that see things, And what the issue I think that's policing and security has is that a lot of the work that we do around sort of national threats is couched under the umbrella of counterterrorism. Now, to the everyday person on the street, they're going to go counterterrorism. That means bombs and stuff. I switch off. Violence against women and girls is seen as such a threat. It's been raised and put the framework around how we deal with terrorist threats. Violence against women and girls has now been placed on that level. But will the general public understand and know that? And do they know why? Do you know what I mean? And I think there's this real, again, it's back to this disconnect. They're doing some great things like, that's right, it should be there. But not explaining that to the general public, right? And that's where they're breaking down. And this is where I think I come into play. The idea for me is to kind of, have this awareness and involvement from the top, policy level, whatever, and then also at this ground level, speaking to people and then shutting that gap, right? We are getting somewhere towards doing what I want to see the world doing in the UK when that gap between these people up here is squashed, right? We get like that. And again, it's back to we need to explain to the general public why these things are important, why and how they affect them. And we have to work out how we do it. So whether it's, part of this piece is going to be through education. Some of it will be through media campaigning. At the event 2 weeks ago on Tuesday, when we were talking about, I put I kind of put it out there at the end of my session. I said, and I meant it, I can see a way in which cities or, areas can come up with sort of charters, if you like, for like Brighton and Hove. So this is a charter for Brighton and Hove. You come to our city. Here are 7 things that, we promise that we will do for you. We're going to keep you safe. We don't tolerate this, but you come here, right? Whether it's for a day out or you're coming to Brighton CEO, SEO conference or whatever, or you're coming to a concert, right? We expect you to behave in this way. And if you don't, off you go, right? And I just think if you get the whole of your community, including people who are making a whole load of money by running their events. So I would be talking, if I were the council leader, Bella Sankey, I would be saying, get the organisers of Brighton SEO, get them to come to your office and have a chat about their responsibility for the 2,000 or 3,000 people that come to their event, how you expect them to behave when they're in Brighton and Hove, right? But it's a two-way thing. It's like, this is what we're going to do for you, but this is what we absolutely, and here it is. And you reinforce that pledge at, the Great Escape, at, the big conference, or, the Brighton and Hove Chamber, the conference every year. You make sure it's woven into everything that we do. So then it becomes subliminal, right? Then everyone in Brighton's going, yeah, this is what we stand for. Yeah, when you come to Brighton, and you want it to get to the point where people can name those 7 pledges, right? We stand for this, 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 and this. Yeah. So it's more, you're not just saying these things or writing them down on a piece of, but you can actually see them embodied in everything that we do in the city, right? Whether it's when we put on an event, hold pride, whatever, you can see it running through all the way. For me, utopia, you get to that point, and it's not difficult, right? It takes coordination and it takes dedication, right? But it's not impossible.
As I hear you speak, I'm smiling because what I hear you talk about is you've talked about accountability, you've talked about responsibility, you're talking about citizenship, talking about community, but you're talking about everyone, every single person, whether you sit in a specific role, whether you're a member of the public. It's something about all of us. As I think I said to you earlier, I was reading something, you want to move safeguarding into human safeguarding and community safeguarding, but more what struck me was around human safeguarding. What's the benchmark of what we expect for people? And the other thing that I think is really important, and this is often a tension, certainly in my work, certainly of recent years, is that you may have someone that's vulnerable and being harmed, but they may also be causing harm to others.
Correct.
And how do you respond to that in the best way? And I don't think there's necessarily an easy response to that.
And County Lines is a perfect example of that, right? Quite often the perpetrator is also the victim, right? And it's a really, really difficult one. Really is, to kind of extricate, how to deal with that. Yeah. But the starting point for me is that is a vulnerable person, right? Whether, despite the fact that they may be the perpetrator or the whatever, the starting point is that vulnerability and our duty of care, and then working our way back from there, right? As opposed to, you are this, pointing the finger and labelling someone, especially a young person. We need to think about, again, back to the root causes, right? Why is that person in that situation? Where was the starting point? What can we do? How can we address that? And that takes time. And again, commitment. But it takes, again, this sort of coordinated, this is, what are we trying to do? Well, we want to stamp out situations where young people can even be approached in that way. So we need to look at their living situation. What about their education? We need to make sure that there is this, coordinated response.
You mentioned the online space, and I another guest that joined me as a child protection lawyer, and he said in 1989, when we wrote the Children Act, we didn't have the internet. And the impact of the internet, in some ways we won't know the full impact for the generation that you were describing earlier, because they're the first ones that have gone through things that I sometimes feel old, sometimes still feel young, but they didn't stand outside the shop waiting for a single that had been released. It's immediate.
No, exactly.
And a lot of life is immediate, and a lot of life is online. I read something about how young people were saying that the online space is often the place where those conversations that you're advocating for that aren't being talked about in the connection like we have right now, they are happening online. And people are feeling heard online, and they are vulnerable online.
And I think this is I think for any safeguarding entity, I think it has to start with young people. I think, because they are the future, right? So, we're in a space and it's messy and whatever. And obviously we can do what we can do to kind of try and mitigate where we are. But I'm all about ensuring that the practices that we take on board are going to be the right ones for the future. But in order for them to be right, we need to be engaging with those young people, these people living that life, or will be living that future life. We cannot come up with plans without having them at the table as well, right?
There's something that you said earlier as well that's whirling in my mind, which especially is, how do we support? It's more than support. It's about our young men. It's about our boys. It's about, what does that what does it mean? You know, the influences are strong and they're quite polarized
Yeah.
at the moment, and yet the harm is very real.
Oh, absolutely.
I think particularly when we're talking about violence against women and girls in particular, um,
We've seen the Andrew Tate effect, right? I mean,
absolutely.
and you cannot underestimate.
I interviewed 3 young men who both quoted Tate and Trump as 2 of the only people that are honest.
There we go.
And I think that, you know, certainly practice-wise, when I think about social care,
Mm,
quite often the emphasis has been on the female,
yeah,
to be protective of the
yeah,
children.
yeah,
And actually the focus from my perspective has always been, "But we need to work with
yeah,
the dad, or we need to work with the
for sure,
partner."
for sure.
I don't know what practice looks like nowadays
No,
in that area,
no,
but certainly from my point of view, would be around how do we work with men,
yeah,
and around behaviours, around relationships,
yes,
around
yeah,
expectations, both for themselves but
yeah.
also for others.
It's a really important piece. I think there, and there's an editor at the Evening Standard called David Cohen, and he did a piece where he was looking at behaviours of 14 to sort of 16-year-olds. I think that was it, 14 and 15-year-olds, 13, 14, 15. And he went into 2 schools, one in South London, one somewhere else. And he kind of wanted to talk to uh, the group of boys and girls about attitudes, sort of sexual
Mhm.
behaviour, and he kind of what he did is that he separated them first of all. So the boys were together and the girls were together, so that they would kind of talk, and then they came back in the room and they kind of expressed themselves. And some of the stuff that was coming out about normalized behaviors for boys, about the way that they thought and treated girls, and the way that girls felt the trepidation about going to school. So back in the day when we went to school, it was just about going to school and hanging out, having a bit of a gossip with your friends and getting on with the problem. These girls are worried about whether people are going to be talking to them, whether they're going to be touched up at school, whether, the boy that they were going out with is going to be telling all his mates about stuff. They're going to school freaked out. They
Mm.
can't concentrate, they can't study, they can't work. That's what school is like now, right? And it's just like, we have no idea about that sort of that massive burden that is on we just think, oh, they go to school, they're just going to learn. It's like all of these other entities, all these other things that are just sort of bearing down on them. We've got to find a way to alleviate that or find them space within those, institutions, arenas, so that they can come and speak freely, And it's not about an assembly, about Andrew Tate. That ain't going to do it, right?
Mm.
It's about really allowing them to speak their truths, but really tell you how they're feeling. And some of the research that came out that was quite phenomenal. And so I think they're doing a sort of a bigger, wider piece on sort of research into that sort of age group and trying to going some way to change those attitudes and behaviours of young people. Because God, if we can't get it right, if we can't get them to change at that point, what's going to be happening 10 years down the line, right?
There's some key themes through everything that you've said, and the thing that is ringing in my mind is about communication.
Yeah.
It's across the board,
Yeah.
and that starting point of entering in or taking a seat at a table and starting the conversation, or
Yeah.
creating the space to start the
Yes,
conversation.
I agree. Yeah, no, for sure. And again, when we say it like that, gosh, it sounds really
Well,
simple, doesn't it? But it's just, a lot of people don't want to, within certain, and they're sort of bound by, rules and procedures within their organisations about what can or cannot be said. And I think we need to unshackle ourselves.
mm,
We need to kind of just let loose, right? If we really want to, instigate the kind of change that we're talking about, people have got to get rid of those sort of, shackles and just kind of open up. Because people we saw at the event, I
yeah,
mean, one of the things that, I was absolutely gobsmacked by was when we had those interactive sessions. My biggest fear was, oh my God, it's going to be silent. No one's going to be talking. And within a second, everyone was in there, and there was this beautiful hum, people's heads together, really debating stuff. And then these were people sitting across the table, they've never met each other before, but within a nanosecond. And I thought, gosh, this is the start of something good.
Do you know,
This is the start of something good.
that was exactly how it was, and there was difference. There
Yeah.
was difference on the table. People were coming
Yeah.
with their own experience, their own agency context. I think that's the other thing as well, that in order to be more open, we perhaps need to be less rigid about what's ours and what's someone else's role. You know, certainly I remember hearing a phrase years ago, and it stuck with me, which safeguarding being everyone's responsibility doesn't mean everyone needs to make a referral to social work or
Yeah.
to the police.
Exactly.
It's about how does everybody have a role, even if that is in the areas that you've talked about, which could be postal services, it could be refuse collection. Anybody that has a role and a place within
Yes.
those communities or a community. We're running out of time, and there's so much more that I would want to speak to you about. But one of the key things for me is I really want to understand. I think you've probably covered a lot of it, but what is it that motivates you to get up every day and do this?
I guess it definitely is. Well, particularly for me, it's my kids, right? You know, when I got up and sort of, you know, when Sarah Everard was murdered, and I just felt this kind of angry, you know, thing going on in my stomach. It was to quell that in a way, but it was also I was looking at these two beautiful things that I kind of brought into the world, and I remember thinking all of that sort of idealism about the kind of, you know, what I wanted life to be for them, and what you know, how I was going to shape their lives and help them on that journey. And then so much, you know, when you're a new or young parent, you know, you're pretty naive, right? You don't know what's going on. And then all these things start happening that, you know, out of your control. And for such a long time, I kind of accepted that. I accepted that as a woman. I had to go walk around with my keys in my hand at night, and I just got to a point, maybe it's sort of maturity, when I just like, no, I don't have to accept that anymore. And also that, you know, when you get older and your children are growing up, you know, there's that sort of whole thing around mortality as well. You're like, oh God, I've got to make sure that my baby's all right. So I, you know, and it was about legacy, I suppose. It was about leaving my mark. I want to leave this planet knowing that I did as much as I could for my children, for other people's children, for women, that I could, you know, and we've all got it in us to do more. And that's what I truly believe. We've all got it in us to do more. And I'm hoping that I'm a sort of a bit of an, I'm not expecting everyone to do what I do, but I think we've all got it in us to do more. And I just hope that people can see me and see that it's possible. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.